Let's start. So first of all, oh, my first student for today. I'm already standing here for 5 hours. You're the first one. All the other one are sitting at home drinking coffee. But it's okay. I'm providing this. But I said yesterday, and yesterday there were a little bit more people participating, especially, or only, yesterday we were only in the digitalized version. I got no emails, only from you, as I remember. So, who wants to participate has to write me today an email. Otherwise, no exam. I have said this now for 2 weeks because I have to choose relevant countries, and therefore I want to know how many people want to participate. So, you just write me an email. I want to do the exam in international trade. And then next week, we will start with a country analysis. Then you get a country from me, which you should analyze. So, another one attended. Please do this. Since it is a term paper, the eCampus is not relevant. Okay, then that's it. And uh, I will switch because I think that is a little bit more interesting compared to doing now the last very general neoclassical trade model, the so-called Heckscher-Ohlin model. So at first I want to switch, which is I think a little bit better to do this right now. Um, Coming from this more descriptive gravity model that we are talking also about the interesting aspect of tariffs, quotas. Uh, um, Remember, within the gravity model, we have talked about this. If you have explicit borders, if there are formalities, and of course, if you have there crazy guys who are increasing their walls via a tariff to shut down their countries for other countries to trade with each other. And therefore, I want to talk with you a little bit about trade theory, and we will make also a little case study that we explicitly look at the trade relations between the European Union and the United States, because this is highly relevant for the last 1 year. You maybe remember that almost every week, sometimes within a day, he changed his mind. And the last one was now that the justice just said, well, almost all your tariffs are not okay. And then I think 2 days later, he said, well, there is another law from 1977. I cannot do the tariffs I have imposed, so I'm imposing another tariffs due to this law of 1977. And yeah, what this means, and to talk about the impact of a tariff, and to look explicitly at his argumentation if we forget everything about him and we just ask ourselves what is behind the argumentation. Well, I'm introducing tariffs because his argumentation is, well, I'm increasing the prices. The ships coming to New York, coming to Los Angeles, and then the companies have to pay. So if you are going to Helgoland and buying some alcohol, then you are, I think, allowed wanted to buy 1 or 2 liters because this is a free trade zone within Germany. But then if you are leaving the island, maybe some guy is looking into your bag, and if you have more than 1 or 2 bottles, then it is looked at the price, and then it is said, well, now you have to pay for it to introduce this good to Germany. And the same is true here, and the money is collected by the state. So I have an income, and this is one of his main arguments that I'm generating billions of US dollar, and then I can spread these money from outside, from all our trading partners to my fellow colleagues, that they can buy a Ferrari. So, well, this is a logic argumentation. But we are here in an economics point of view, and we know that, of course, this is not the end of the story. There are happening other things. Because if you are changing the price, and this is what this guy does not have in mind, this means also that quantities are changing. Remember, we have this falling demand curve. The higher the price, the less I buy. And the overall income collection is not only the collection per one unit, but it is tariff times the whole quantity. It's the same like a revenue. If you increase the selling price of your good, your X, your quantity will go down. And at first, you do not know if afterwards, after having increased the price, you have a higher revenue. You can even have a lower revenue. If the fall or if the amount of the lower quantity is larger than the increase of the price, then you have a lower revenue. And so what we are then will do today is to look at a concept to evaluate the overall effect. And yeah, well, about elasticities, I talked yesterday, and this is again, revenue is increasing or not. This just depends also on your demand elasticity, larger or lower than 1. Okay, so we just want to look what happens if we are introducing a tariff, and you can, similarly do this, that you make a restriction. Well, from abroad, you are only allowed to ship a specific amount. So let's say you are only allowed to import 100 bicycles. This has, of course, a quite similar impact as if you say for every bicycle you have to pay a tariff of 20% or something like this, because this also means that the quantity is reduced. So we want to talk about the effect of tariffs and the quota, and we are starting at first when we say we are just sitting in a small country. And unfortunately, this is the general situation where we even have to admit that this is the situation if we act as Germany alone relative to the United States. Although we are the third largest economy in the world, we are still a small country compared to the United States. But later on, when then I model the whole European Union together, then we will, and we have fortunately have fortunately seen that we have at least some power. But we will start with this small country. Okay, so we are a small country relative to the global market. We assume a just normal demand and supply structure because, or this then means we have supply and demand without any international trade. We just say we have this equilibrium at autarky. And we are assuming, and this means small, that this translates in a completely price elastic supply for us relative to the global market. So what does this then mean? Oh, I open also the chat, but you can also use your microphone since we are only a small number of people. If we are introducing such a completely price elastic supply relative, so we cannot change anything of the global market price. If we take the global market price as given, how looks then the global supply curve if I introduce this global supply curve in my diagram here? So this means world market price is taken as given. How does it look like? Try to describe it. If the global if the global market price, so the price for what I can buy the goods at the global market is fixed, is given. Hmm? Actually, about such things you should have talked when you were talking about this general market concept, supply and demand curves, in your introductory courses. Therefore, my hope is that I'm not always, yes, yeah, fully competitive markets we have. So also the global market is fully competitive, not only we in our little country. And so to speak, now we put both together. We say we are just opening ourselves for the global market. And we can buy still, of course, then we have the same demand structure. Nothing changes in our demand, but our supply structure is now changing because we have our own supply curve and we have the supply from the global market. So we are still free to buy at home or to buy at the global market. So we have to aggregate the global market supply and our home supply. And we are assuming a completely price elastic supply curve. So how then this global supply curve looks like if we want to draw this into our diagram. Well, you can even forget about all this economic stuff and just think about this analytically. If I have a function, we have variables p and x, and I have now a function, world market supply XSW of P. And if this has the property fully price elastic, so prices are fixed, how to draw a constant into my diagram? Yes, fully horizontal, great. And we make an additional assumption. This, you know, maybe from microeconomics. If some other fixed price is higher than the equilibrium price, so if our home equilibrium price would be, let's say, 3 euros, and the world market supply inelastic price, a fully elastic price would be 10 euros, then I say, well, okay, it doesn't matter for me. I'm still buying at home. So we are also assuming that this fully horizontal line is below the home equilibrium market price at autarky. So it is then maybe somewhere here. And we say, well, the home supply curve starts at the beginning for small x. Still, our supply, our marginal costs are lower than the home supply. So the aggregated supply curve for us would be then at first the lower part compared to the world market price. Then the home supply curve is relevant, and then we have this kink that then, of course, the consumers take the lower price due to the world market price as their supply curve. Okay, thank you very much. This was actually quite fast because in my first two lectures today, I was a little bit angry because it took time and time and time until I got an answer. And there have even participated a little bit more guys than here. Okay, so this would be then the case and supply and demand. So, first of all, if we look at this diagram now and remember organizing our market as hopefully fully competitive market, the argument was that we have then an efficient provision of our quantities, and this efficiency meant that we have the maximum sum of consumers and producer surplus. So now the supply is changing. And now, first of all, we have to analyze, is it a good idea from this country to open their market for the world? Because of course, remember also the specific factors model that we have there an impact. Now there are some producers which cannot sell anymore because they are at home too expensive. They would say, not a good idea, but we are looking at the overall situation of the country. So from this consumers and producers surplus concept, can we deduce that it is a good idea to open the market? Because otherwise, I will step out of this classroom and just say, well, Donald Duck is right. Shutting everything up, being alone, Germany first, France first, America first, US, America first. This is a really good idea. So do we have an economic argument that it is might be that maybe it is a good idea to trade with each other? And we had already this idea from Ricardo model. We had already the idea from specific factors model, and there are many others. So relative This is autarky. Where would we find the world market or the opening equilibrium of our country? Where do we find this? Yeah, where? Can you explain it in more detail? Where do I find the new equilibrium? If you have to describe it. Yeah, 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 for sure. It is. Yeah, the aggregated supply curve is cutting our demand because still we said our preferences, our utility has not changed. So our demand curve is still the same. So world market, or let's say, no, not world market. We are buying, but we are small compared to the world market. So trade equilibrium. So, and now let's compare the sum of the consumer surplus and producer surplus in autarky with the situation in trade. Well, this is today my interactive day. In the first two lectures, I also always, maybe I surprised everybody that it could be possible that I'm always asking something. Well, we still want to know, is it a good idea to open our markets? And I said we want to compare the both situations with the consumer surplus and with the consumers and the producer surplus concept. Because the sum of both we interpret as the welfare in the country. Yeah, and this question, this is qualitatively right. It is harmful for the producing side, but it is beneficial because, of course, the world market price, this is our assumption, is below the outer key price. So we know that it is beneficial for the consumers. And what we now have to calculate is the surplus of or the benefit for the consumers, is this larger than the loss of the producers? Because then we can make the same argumentation as in the specific factors model that we say where we have two groups. For one group it is harmful, for one group it is beneficial, but in the specific factors model we have derived that the overall benefit for the society is that large that we can say the group which benefits can give up something so that they are still better off compared to the outer case situation, but the amount they can give up is that large that we can compensate the losing group so that this group is also better off later on. And hopefully we can derive the same now. Because if the situation would be of that kind that we say, okay, there are some guys who are happier, but there are definitely other guys who are worse off later on, then we would still have to admit that Donald Duck is maybe right, because maybe the preferences in the United States States and the producing conditions in the United States are maybe of that kind that it is overall a good idea to introduce tariffs. So what was consumer surplus and producer surplus? I know that you have done this in other lectures. And please, at least most of you, producers are losing. What do you mean by this, what you are writing this? I do not understand. You have to describe where do I find producer surplus in the outer key situation and consumer surplus, and where do I find the two surpluses in the trade situation. For this, of course, you have to know what is consumers and producer surplus. Triangles formed on the left, a little bit more specific, I think um, you you mean the right things, because triangles is good. In which situation, and what do you mean by a little triangle? Mm. Yeah, but in which situation you are? In the outer key situation, or about which situation you are talking now? Outer key or trade? You don't know. Because here are lots of triangles. Because one question in an exam could be, well, show within a diagram the change of producers and consumer surplus. And in history, actually, I have already asked something like this. Or I can even ask, well, please, we already know, and this is true, that these are maybe triangles, that I then give you explicit functions and I just ask, please calculate what is the area of the consumer surplus. So this is what I mean, that you have to be able to use the concepts you have learned. So let's start with microeconomics, only this diagram. Then we said, well, everybody is buying and selling for this price. Okay. The supply curve is represented by, yeah, bottom left, this is right. That is formed by country supply and world supply. Okay, then you are in the trade situation. So let's do this in red. So this one would be then the producer surplus of the world. So, but now I step back to microeconomics. We argued everybody is buying for this price. This supply curve is more or less represented by the marginal cost function. So it represents the cost situation in our firm. Due to this marginal cost increasing in price, we would say, well, this quantity we would even sell for a lower price but I can buy it for a higher price. So this difference here for this specific quantity is my special surplus. And of course, this is true, or this argumentation we have for every X. And so overall, this would be the producer surplus and the consumer surplus. Well, this is our demand curve. This comes from utility maximization. So due to our preferences, this quantity here, I would even pay a higher price, but I pay only P star. So this is my benefit going to the market. The same we had the argumentation there we used relative prices when we have talked about the Ricardian model. There we said we have a home exchange rate between the two goods. Remember, I am willing to pay, how was it? I don't have it, the numbers in mind, but let's say I'm willing to pay 3 coconuts for 1 fish. And the other one said, well, at least I want to have only 1 coconut for 1 fish. Then they can start to trade and maybe they match somewhere. Let me give me 2 coconuts for 1 fish, and then both are better off. One was willing to pay 3, he pays only 2, a benefit of 1, and the other one wanted to have only 1 and he gets 2. This was this win-win situation of a market. So this one would be then the consumer surplus. So now I have given the answer. That's not so good. So this one here, and then you can think of the consumer surplus after opening the borders. This would be then the producer surplus at outer key. And this would be the consumer surplus in the outer key situation. Now in red, where I find the consumer surplus after opening the market. I'm able to buy now for PW. What is my benefit now? That I only have to pay PW. Is everybody of you already in the Easter holiday or what? Hmm? You have an idea? Do you have an idea where I find it? The consumer's surplus after, yeah, and? Yes, for sure. It's just the area between the demand curve, and this is always true. This is the concept of consumer surplus. The area, demand curve, minus the horizontal line represented by the equilibrium price. So this is consumer surplus of the world. And then, of course, we see this area here is, of course, the overall welfare increase. Whew. And now we see if the world market price has a relevant lower level than our outer key price, then we see that in general, the overall benefit is quite large opening your markets. And this is what I always would recommend that Donald Duck and all his other guys maybe should attend at a introductory course in trade theory. It is, well, if you accept in general, of course, and maybe this is the problem of these guys, but on the other hand, he earned all his money in the market, his billions of US dollars. So he used his whole life until he went to the election in the market. So he profited very much from free markets. And now they are neglecting more or less everything what is about free markets and why it is a quite good idea to act within free markets. Well, anyway, it is like it is. So this is the situation. We have learned, well, opening our markets is overall beneficial because from this very large surplus, okay, now we can redistribute within our country so that in the end, the producers obtain a transfer, which we find here, so that overall everybody is better off. So this is the situation. Of course, within our country, we have to implement then this redistribution. But we again, as in the specific factors model, we know that this is possible. Okay, but now we are in the situation after World War II, we really, between European Union and the United States, we really started to open our markets with each other. Roughly around 2010, we had the discussion the other way around as we have it right now. There, we had an initiative to create a free market, a free trade area of the United States and the European Union together. Here you see within very short time, we really switched what we are doing in the world. We are now in a totally oppositional situation right now. We are now talking about looking everybody is looking only at their own countries. So I have done many things here. Therefore, I just copy this because now we are starting from the free trade situation. And we want now to ask what is happening if we, that's it, and this one, and all the other things I, no, like this, I can, and I need the, can I click on this? There it is. Supply and demand, and here we are at the free trade situation. So maybe, oh, this we can also add. In this situation, how much are we exporting? Where do I find, not the exporting, how much do I import? What is the import volume? because we said, well, we are now starting to buy this overall amount. How much I buy at home and how much I buy from abroad. Hmm? Hmm, 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 hmm. So, dear students, what we are doing here is just using this introductory concept of a market diagram with supply and demand. Nothing more and nothing less. And this concept we are now applying to a free trade situation of a small country. Okay, we have now this kinked supply curve. It's somehow a little bit different, but only a little. And what is this all about? This is about that you are learning concepts and that you are then able to use these concepts, applying them to new situations. If you have the idea that later on you are working and then that always something happens and you say, oh, great, let's have a look in my lecture 5 years ago. There I find the answer. This will not be the case. The world is changing. But, and this is what we are doing here, we hope that after your degree, you are then in a position that you can say, well, let's see what happens. I have useful concepts and I know what then I do, and then I start to analyze the situation. In order to get a fruitful answer, what to do, that I have an idea what would be now a good decision to do. So imports, of course, we are finding here. Why? At this price level, home production is cheaper than world production. So this amount is the home production, and the rest is provided by the world, since home production would be more expensive. Okay, so now let's introduce a tariff T. And this tariff should be imposed in this way that we do not say, well, it is 10%, but that it is a tariff €1 per unit. So tariff per unit. What happens within our picture if we are introducing a tariff? So every ship which is coming to us, which in general would sell for PW, and now again, I'm a bicycle rider, so for every bicycle like this guy, now it's the other way around. We have not bought coming from Helgoland, but we are going and we want to sell the product in a country, and there staying some guys and say, well, before you have to pay for every product you want to bring into our country 10 euros. What does this mean then for his supply price? Because afterwards he still wants to sell in our country. But before he can sell, he have to pay the tariff. What is changing in our picture? Yes, of course, it is increased by the tariff. This means graphically we have a parallel shift upward. So again, now we assume that this tariff is not that large that is prohibitive, so that the sum of the world market price plus the tariff is higher than our autarky equilibrium price, because then we do not have to talk anymore about trade or something like this. Then we are back again in the autarky situation. So this could be the case. Well, Mr. Trump has started to impose on Chinese products 100%, 150%. They are in the neighborhood of prohibitive tariff rates, but we here want to look at the more interesting situation. So assume if this is P star again, that PW plus PT is smaller than P star. So let's do this again in red. Then we would have, and the delta here would be T. So what would be then the still trading situation, but with a tariff? Where do I find it? Now we have a situation where we still are open for the world market, but we have introduced our tariff. So then something has to change for our country. We have a new equilibrium. Where do I find the new equilibrium? Mhm. So it is a cut of two lines. Where is the cut? Pardon? Yeah, demand, world price with tariff. Here we are. So this would be, let's say, the tariff equilibrium. So this amount is then sold. Let's say this is XT. And of course, equilibrium price is now PW plus PT. So again, welfare analysis. What happens to welfare compared to the free trade? What happens to welfare compared to free trade. Hmm? Pardon? In the end, we can show that welfare is decreased, but let's go stepwise. Again, producer surplus, consumer surplus, and so on. Yes, great. Where do I find the increase of the producer surplus? Which area is it? Yeah, producer surplus increase. And now, please be specific within our diagram. Where do I find it? This would be then the overall, and now I ask for the change compared to this situation. Yes, yes, great. So I use now this part of the supply curve. I'm coming from this, and now I say, well, now more home producers are able to sell their products. So this we call A, and this is the plus of the producer surplus. So delta producer surplus with the tariff would be A. Consumers, are they benefiting, or do they say, well, we are not that happy that you have introduced a tariff? Yes, and again, can you describe me the area? Where do I find it? The difference again, yeah. We are starting from this. Yes, now we take this part of the, yeah, you are also right, of the demand curve, and now we take all the area to the left. This, I think you meant by the delta between in price. So this would be then this area plus A, and now, and maybe you have already an idea, I just do not call this area just B, but I divide this trapeze. Is this an English name for trapeze? I have to look it up. First time I'm using this. Trapezoid, I think it is. Oh no. Okay, so this would be here a trapezoid. And I do not call this just B. I'm dividing this trapezoid into 3 areas, and then I call this B, C, and D. But already we can say that delta consumer surplus is A plus B plus C plus D. Do you have an idea why I have divided this overall trapezoid in these 4 areas? Yeah, then it's a rectangle and 2 triangles. Yeah, but the formula for what is the formula for the area of a trapezoid? Hmm? Hmm. Yeah, something with the length, but we have 2 lengths here. what do we have we have to do with these two lengths? So with this short one and with the long one? Actually, this is yes. C and D is the dead weight loss, what you have written, but at first the formula for the area of a trapezoid is the sum of the two lengths divided by 2, so just the arithmetic mean, to use a statistical argument, times the height. So you are then quite fast if you are now arguing that the overall loss is only B plus D, then you have to explain. Oh, you here this is actually not totally right what you have written, but there is some right things. Is you have written C is taxes. Well, we are here in the trade situation, so not tax, but this is our tariff income. So C, this is okay, is the tariff volume, I call this. And this, of course, we interpret as beneficial. This is the argument of Donald Duck. He says, I have an income. Remember the first statement. And this is, of course, true. And this is quite a large area if you look at this here. So, and he says, well, I can redistribute all this to all my fellow guys, and afterwards the United States is better off. And of course, with this argument, he has maybe won his first election at least, because then he said, well, all my old industry situated at the Rust Belt around the Great Lakes, they say, if you vote for me, then I will protect you. That you can again produce, that steel is again produced in the United States and we do not buy it anymore from the world. And this would be then the argument we find here. Also totally true. Yes, they are benefiting. And he was, or his team was quite clever because they were much better. This is my opinion, that in 2015 they have analyzed where are the relevant groups which are right now not really knowing for whom they should vote. And then they have also analyzed where is the number of these people large enough so that the result is changing within the states. And therefore, you have to keep in mind that in the United States, we have a different kind of framework how your votes are collected. In Germany, we just say, well, there are about 60 million people who are allowed to vote. And then we count and we see, well, 40 million for this party, so you have 62%. It is not that easy in the United States because in the United States, you at first are counting in every state, and then you look within the state who has, which party has the most votes. They even do not have to have 50%, more than 50%, because in general, you have not only two parties, you have even more, or you have also even more candidates. But in general, in practical, the situation in the United States is like this, that you say, okay, it is the Republican and the Democrats guy. So in practice, it is more or less, do you have 50 plus one or not? But if there would be more candidates with a relevant number of votes, it would be also enough only to have 40% within the state. And then this is mean, and all the states are forming the so-called electoral college. And due to the inhabitants in every state, they have a number of people going to this electoral college. So maybe Ohio 8, California with much larger number of inhabitants 42, New York 20, Maine 3 or something like this. And if you have one of these states, then you get 100% of these votes who in the end electing the US president. And they have really, this is my opinion, done a they deeply analyzed where are the so-called swing states. Where is it that it is only a small number of people are deciding who gets all the people for the electoral college. And then he more or less won all these, and there was, I think, Michigan, Ohio, and I think it was 3 or 4 states around the former industrial part of the United States, and he won all these, and therefore this was his first presidency. Okay, but now he has done what he has promised. These guys are better off. He also said, well, I'm collecting a very high income for everybody, or maybe he not for everybody, but only for his friends. But unfortunately, and now you are not, yes, you have already read this. We have also this triangle here, and these two together are now our dead weight losses. Because we can say this is a plus, also the tariff volume is a plus, but this is an overall loss of the consumers. And if we now calculate the change in welfare, then unfortunately we have to admit that we have delta CST minus delta PST minus, how did I call this, tariff volume? Let's say TV. And this is then A plus B plus C plus D minus A minus B is A B plus D. And this is then, as you have written it, the dead weight loss. C, A, B, no, that's okay. Here that this is wrong, yeah. This has to be a C. Thank you. Okay, well, it took a little bit time or more time than I expected today because right now this is not the end of the story for the United States. Because of what? Because of which assumption? To remember in what kind of situation. And this is always very important that you always keep in mind which assumptions you have made. What are your restrictions? So this model which we have created here is relevant for what? And then there we have an assumption where we have to admit, well, if this is a good assumption, model in the United States. High tariff, of course. We maybe have here 20%. What is one? There's a crucial assumption we have made where we have to admit, well, is this a good assumption for the United States? Yes, somehow. But well, I have to admit that I wrote here that this is an assumption, but if we have a deeper look, or if we are a little bit more careful, then we maybe have to admit that this assumption is following from something else, which we have assumed also too. Yes, of course. United States are roughly 30% of the world. So if they are opening their markets, that this, of course, has an impact, and then you are right on world prices. This is, of course, true. So um, maybe 20 minutes left. I don't know if we come, because then, of course, we have to relax this situation and we have to ask, can we create a better model or a more applicable model where we can then argue, okay, this is a good model to model a large country which has impact on the world prices. Okay, but we will come to this later. Okay, there we have this again, and then I go through this now a little bit faster. We want to ask, well, what happens if we introduce a quota? So we just say there is only something which, or there's only some amount which is allowed to come into our country. Again, we have this world supply structure. Remember, these were total imports if we have a free trade market equilibrium. And now we say no, this overall amount we don't allow. And let's say we introduce a quota of this. This is just roughly 60% or something like this. Okay, what does this now mean? Well, again, let's do it in red. We are starting here. Now the quota can be sold without a tariff. We have not introduced a tariff. So this quota can still be sold for the world market price. But then we have to stop here and still we see if we could go on selling, there is still the demand possibility left. But now not the abroad producers are still allowed to sell their products. So then, so to speak, the home producers are again stepping in because here are some guys who still would, for a slightly higher price, still sell their products. So we make a parallel shift of this supply curve to the right. adding this supply curve now here. They start to increase their prices. Demand is falling, but we have then a new cut here, and this would be then the quota equilibrium. Oops. And this would be the quota price. And here you see that this is then, quite similar to the situation of the trade of the tariff situation. Because again, well, at this part, we have this change in consumer surplus. Let's again introduce these areas here. This is again the change of the producer, A, B, C, and D. A, B, C, and D, all home consumers have to pay this higher price. So delta producer surplus is again A, delta consumer surplus is, and let's say we divide this area into a C prime and C double prime, A plus B plus C prime plus C double prime plus D. And what we now can also say, well, the importers are benefiting since they can sell for PQ is larger than PW. So, but we are making the laws, we are making the rules. We have imposed this quota here. So what we then can do is that we let the importers pay for their right to import, and they are willing to pay just this amount C prime and C double prime. Because why? Up to this amount, it is still beneficial for them. Or if we use this full area, then it is just the border. So let's assume we are just 1 cent below this. So theoretically, so we have the possibility to charge the importers a quota fee, which is that large, similar to this area here. So then we can say the home country can charge the importers up to a total fee of C prime plus C double prime. So this would be then quota fee, let's call this QF. And then again, we have overall welfare effect. And this is then again delta W, the loss. This is minus, this is plus, this is plus, the loss of the consumers, A plus B plus C prime plus C double prime plus D, minus the plus of the producers and minus the plus that we have the possibility to increase our income by this quota fee. So C prime plus C double prime, this cancels, and again, we have the similar situation that we have an overall loss with this quota. So in general, then we can say overall, it doesn't matter if we are introducing a quota or if we are introducing a tariff. But then we want to talk a little bit about, of course, in practice, it has differences. And because why? Well, it is it is a different way how you implement this rule. Because in general, if we introduce a quota, then this means, well, we have to get somehow an idea how much are the importers, how much will the importers really pay? Because we have, before we introduce this quota, we have to have an idea, well, how large has this quota to be in order to obtain this price effect here. And in general, we have to admit we do not know really how does these overall these overall function, these supply function looks like. There you have to go into the data to get an idea. Well, I know that introducing a quota will increase the price, but then I have to have an idea how large will be the quantitative effect. And in order to get these information, these rent seeking, this is of course costful. Yeah. And on the other hand, and therefore maybe this crazy guy overseas just says, well, let's not introduce a quota, but let's introduce a tariff. So a tariff is, so to speak, more direct. Everybody knows the price today, and then he just calculates inelastic demand that everybody is importing the same amount. Well, this is of course not true, but it is more direct that you then just think, well, introducing this tariff would then mean that the price is increased by this amount, and that I have then this income of new import volume times the tariff. So a tariff would be more direct. And then on the other hand, if we are introducing a tariff, then we do not know, we have a better idea where will be the price, but we have not such a good idea where is now the new import volume. because the new import volume is settled via the price mechanism. And so to speak, we know it just afterwards when the new equilibrium has settled down. So if we want, to introduce something where we just say, well, in this market, we want to have that 50% is produced at home and maybe 50% is imported from others. So if our aim is to steer more the quantity, then a quota would be the policy instrument. Because then we are more directly controlling the quantity. So in the end, qualitatively, we have the same result. But in practice, we have to ask ourselves, what is our aim? Do we want more to control the quantity, or do we want more to control the price? So 5 minutes left. Then maybe this is the homework for you, because then now we want to model the real world, especially United States. And this is then the general model of trade. And then we have to admit, of course, if the United States are trading, then they influence, of course, world market prices. And we want to simplify this a little bit. But on the other hand, this would be also a good way to analyze the actual situation, that we just say, well, we have two countries. At first, they are alone, and these two countries have a similar size. And if they bilaterally open their markets, what will happen then? And this is, in the end, in my opinion, a good starting point to analyze the situation between the European Union and the United States. Because together we are roughly 50% of the world, and we have similar sizes. So relatively to each other, the European Union and the United States are not small. And so we now say we are modeling the world, so to speak, dividing the world into two areas, A and B, called now country A and B. And think about this, European Union and the United States, both with two own demand and supply structures. And then that something happens if we are introducing, or if we are opening the markets, then of course we have to assume that the equilibrium prices in autarky are differing in both countries. Because otherwise, why shall I buy from abroad when I can buy for the same price at home? Okay? So, and then let's go to the world market. 2 minutes left. Maybe we will make this. So, and actually you have done this already in your microcourse, where you just said, well, you are starting with one individual or one firm, and then you have asked, well, what will be then the overall market supply? What will be then the overall market demand? What you have done then is just you horizontally added all supply curves and you horizontally added all demand curves. Now we will do it in a similar way, but a little bit different, that we just say, well, the other country starts just to be relevant for me for country A only if the price is lower than my starting equilibrium price. So if we go then with this price level to the other country, what do we find then? Okay, this high price I cannot sell at home for this high price because the equilibrium price is here. So supply in for this price in the country B is larger than demand. But at this price, country A would start to buy in country B. So this would mean we can always take the differences between supply and demand in the other country in order to create a world demand function. This is then the function of demand of country A, which would go to the world market. Okay? And the other way around, we can start from this side. Well, they would sell, starting to sell, if we go here, and then we have the differences of these. So then maybe I should take 46, some other colors here. Let's take this one, this one, this one. We can take this difference here, adding this here, this one here, adding this roughly here, and this one here, adding this here. So this would be then world supply, so to speak. And let's take green, starting with this from here. Maybe a little bit here, this one, and this one. So world demand, and then we have the quantity they are exchanging at the world market, and this would be the world price. So this we find then also here, and we find this quantity also here. And this is then what B sells to A, and this is what A buys from B. And these quantities are, of course, the same. Okay. And you can already think about Eastern, about the question, what happens in this situation when we are introducing a tariff? And here we will model it if we start to introduce a tariff by country A. Okay, that's it. Happy Easter. See you next week. And then I will not ask you that much questions. I promise.